What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stokastic Fantasy Football channel. Yes, Stokastic, we are in the midst of a rebrand right now. We are moving from Osmo to Stokastic, but that doesn't mean anything is changing. We have all the same tools, same personalities, everything you are used to, it is all the same. And today on the channel, we will be breaking down the top 12 fantasy football wide receivers ahead of the 2022 season. With me to do so is Nick Lepri on Twitter at Notorious Fantasy. Nick, what is up?
Hello, Matt. Hope you are doing well today. And I am also doing great. And I'm excited to break down these wide receivers. The first couple of guys, it's basically chalk. I know some people will have a certain player ranked ahead of another player, but at the end of the day, there's kind of a consensus top five. But after that is where things kind of start to open up. And it seems like if you look at a lot of top 12 lists from other analysts, from other websites, so if you look at like ESPN's ADP, Sleeper's ADP, all these ADPs, it's pretty different for the top 12 after the top five. So I'm pretty interested to see what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, we've done a couple of these videos so far. So you and I, of course, are going to debate each other on some of the differences we have in our rankings. But when we're talking top five guys, really the differences are razor thin. You know, if I end up with Jamar Chase instead of Justin Jefferson, I'm really not that upset. And the same can be said for most of these players on this list. But before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. And lastly, for the purposes of ADP, we will be using Underdog Fantasy, the sponsor of today's video. We'll talk to you a little bit about them. But if the ADP you're using is a little bit different, we use Underdog Fantasy, the best place to play football, fantasy football, in the summer months. All right, what do you say we dive into this?
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so you already alluded to it. It is just straight chalk at the top. No surprises. Cooper Kupp is the wide receiver one in my rankings, in your rankings, basically across the industry. And there's really just not enough good things to say about him. He's a target dominator in an explosive offense now led by Matthew Stafford. I think the jump that we saw Cooper Kupp take when he moved from Jared Goff to Matthew Stafford was somewhat predictable. However, I didn't predict the season he had. He was just downright ridiculous. First in yards per route run, first in targets, a 31.7 target share, 32.4 air yard share. And not much is different with this offense. They do bring in Allen Robinson to replace the losses of Odell Beckham. We'll see if he comes back and Robert Woods. But I mean, Cooper Kupp should be in line for a monstrous season this year. Do you have him ranked one? I believe you do. And really, where's the lowest you think he could be ranked? Because to me, I don't really see any other options.
Yeah, I got him at number one. It seems like every single year, the number one guy at running back, wide receiver, they change basically every year. So it does seem kind of unlikely that Cooper Kupp would finish back to back as the wide receiver one, but the safest place to put him is number one. Like you said, he was the number one receiver in half PPR points per game, number one in targets, receptions, receiving yards, touchdowns. This guy was number one in eating breakfast with Matthew Stafford. If you remember that narrative from the beginning of last season, how him and Matthew Stafford ate breakfast together. And that's why Robert Woods was so shit when he was healthy. But it is what it is. Cooper Kupp is the clear number one wide receiver in fantasy football. The guy's going to dominate again. He's bound to regress slightly, but he's still going to see a very similar target share in the offense. So if he finishes outside of the top three and plays in all 17 games, I would be shocked.
Yeah, I agree with you. If you're trying to knock him, and I mean, you got to reach pretty far. Age maybe is one. He's 29 years old. Like, just for your reference, he's a few months older than Brandon Cooks. And it might not seem like it, but he came into the NFL as an older prospect. He's an FCS player. And, you know, Cooks came in as one of the youngest players in his class coming out of Oregon State. So it's funny to see that. But ultimately, there's not a lot of tread on the tires for Kupp. Not much is changing in the offense. We talked about targets. Even with Allen Robinson coming in, this team still has 166 vacated targets and 132 from the receiver position. So I don't think he's going to get 191 targets again, but I think a safe bet is 175. What do you think about that?
Yeah, like 175, 180 shouldn't be surprising at all. I mean, 11.2 targets per game is just fucking crazy. So if he gets just like 10 targets a game, he's still going to be rolling.
Agreed. All right, let's go to wide receiver two. This is kind of where the debate can start. For you and I, we're doing our consensus ranking, so we just blended our rankings together. I have Justin Jefferson, wide receiver two. He comes up wide receiver two in the consensus rankings. You had him there as well. Another player with a lot of really good things to say. He was fourth in targets last year. He was fifth in yards per route run. The team is undergoing some changes. They basically overhauled their coaching staff and front office, so the offense could look a little different. But ultimately, I think that might benefit him. Last year, they were 18th in pass rate, 13th in plays per game. Maybe they try to open it up a little more with Kirk Cousins. I mean, they're still going to be chasing Green Bay Packers if you want to look at betting lines for the division. So I think they need to change a little bit of what this offense looks like. Jefferson's just been a stud since he entered the league. So to me, it's really hard to rank him lower than wide receiver 2. I could see conversations with Chase, but to me, he's a little safer due to lack of competition. It's basically just Thielen there. What do you think about Jefferson?
Yeah, the lack of competition is definitely true. Adam Thielen's been banged up the last couple of years, but I think if Adam Thielen stays healthy, he could have a great year. Obviously, he's not a top 12 receiver. We won't talk about him more in today's video, but I think he's pretty interesting for fantasy football, best ball drafts. But when it comes to Justin Jefferson, like you said, he is just super safe. He was a top 5 wide receiver last year. The only metric that wasn't the best for him that knocked him outside of the top 5, that wasn't a top 5 metric because he was top 5 in targets, receptions, receiving yards. It was total touchdowns. And that's because when Adam Thielen is healthy, this guy just sucks in all the touchdowns. Him and Justin Jefferson scored the exact same amount of touchdowns, and Adam Thielen played less games. But like you mentioned, with the new coaching staff there, I think this team's going to look to be slightly more pass heavy. I'm not going to say they're going to be top 5 in pass plays per game because they have Dalvin Cook. It makes sense that they want to run the ball, but I do believe they will be looking to be a little bit more pass heavy this season with Kirk Cousins. And while everyone gives Kirk Cousins a lot of negativity, right? It seems like no one likes Kirk Cousins. He's not that bad, guy. So Justin Jefferson will be just fine.
Yeah, he's been a serviceable quarterback, slightly above average quarterback, I think we can say, since he entered the league and since he started playing with Minnesota. And he's propped up some receivers as far as fantasy production goes. I'm still okay ranking Jefferson ahead of Chase because of that lack of competition. There's so many similarities between those two players. I mean, Chase is 22, Jefferson's 23. They both have elite speed. Chase with the sub 4.4, but Jefferson was right at 4.43. I mean, they both have pretty good size. They both win downfield. So there's just a lot of similarities between these players. And going to our wide receiver 3, surprise nobody here. It is Ja'Marr Chase, the 22-year-old phenom entering his second year in the league, broke out immediately as a rookie, and he won all over the field. It was cool to see his usage kind of change throughout the year. Remember in the playoffs, you saw him take that screen pass like 70 yards down the field. So he wasn't just winning on these deep plays. He was actually catching the ball, making guys miss after the catch too. As far as yards per route run, he was 6th in the NFL as a rookie, which is just mind-boggling. The issue with Chase is he has to compete with T. Higgins, and that's what's the difference is basically between Jefferson and Chase to me. Chase was 19th in targets in the NFL. He only had a 23.7% target share. That was actually behind Higgins. And unless Higgins gets hurt, I don't really see that climbing up to the near 30% target share Justin Jefferson had. So that's the main difference for me. Two really good elite talents, young at the position, explosive offenses, but Jefferson gets the edge. Where do you find Chase in your rankings this year, and what do you think he looks like moving forward?
Yes, I have Chase one spot back at wide receiver 4, and we will be talking about the guy that I have ranked at number 3 a little bit later. But when it comes to Ja'Marr Chase, he is very safe. He was top 5 in half PPR, top 5 in points per game. He kind of struggled a bit, like you said, in terms of targets and receptions, but makes up with it by the fact that he's just super efficient. When you throw this guy the ball, he's going to do great things. He had 1,455 receiving yards, 4th at wide receiver, and 13 total touchdowns, 4th at wide receiver. I fully expect Ja'Marr Chase to not really go super high in terms of target share, right? 7.5 targets per game. Maybe he can get up to 8.5, but I don't see him surpassing 10 like a guy like Cooper Kupp can and potentially Justin Jefferson. I think at the end of the day, though, Ja'Marr Chase is super safe. He's linked to one of the better offenses in the NFL, and I personally believe that with the better offensive line, that's going to help out Joe Burrow a ton, and in turn, that will also help out Ja'Marr Chase.
I agree. And maybe we can talk about the next player in conjunction with Ja'Marr Chase, because I have Chase ahead of him. You have Davante Adams, our wide receiver 4 in the consensus ranking, slightly ahead of Chase. With Adams, I'll kind of lay out the very few the very few negatives that do exist with him. He's transitioning from the Green Bay Packers to the Las Vegas Raiders. So to me, the target share probably goes down. I mean, the guy saw a 32% target share last year. That was 169 targets, second in the NFL. He's moving over to Vegas where there's just more players to compete with. Hunter Renfrow, Darren Waller. So maybe he doesn't have the 32% target share, but that offense should be a little pass heavier than Green Bay, which perhaps can close that gap a little bit. But from there, you're also getting a downgrade at quarterback. You're moving from Aaron Rodgers to Derek Carr. Now, I do think Derek Carr's kind of in that Kirk Cousins range where he's above average, maybe just slightly. But Aaron Rodgers is an MVP caliber quarterback. the quality of targets to me is going to drop. So when I'm talking about two players that have competition in the offense, one being a little more efficient than the other, that is Ja'Marr Chase. Adams, I mean, there's not really too much to knock. He was third in yards per route run, two very efficient pass catchers. To me, I'll side with the better quarterback, and that is Joe Burrow. But talk to me about Adams.
Yeah, so when it comes to Davante Adams, the targets are definitely going to dip, but I think he'll be able to make up with that with the receiving yards as well as the touchdowns. We've seen it for the last couple of years. When they're anywhere near the end zone, the Green Bay Packers, they're throwing the ball to Davante Adams because you don't even have to throw the ball right to him. You just got to get somewhere near him and he's going to go up and get it. I think the fact that defense is going to have to worry about Hunter Renfrow, they're going to have to worry about Darren Waller in the red zone. I think that's going to help out Davante Adams a ton. And even with a slight target dip, I still just think Davante Adams is that good of a wide receiver. You can make the argument that he is the best wide receiver in the NFL, that he's going to be just fine. And you also don't trade for Davante Adams and give him a boatload of a contract. You don't back up the Brinks truck for Davante Adams if you don't plan for him to be the clear number one receiver in the offense. So I think Davante Adams will be just fine. I understand why you would prefer Ja'Marr Chase. It's very close for me. Again, it's nothing worth screaming at you about.
Oh, it's close for me too. And to your point, looking at the offense as a whole, they do have all those players that are still there that will be targeted, Renfro and Waller, but they also have 130 vacated targets from the wide receiver position. We saw guys like Zay Jones getting targets in this offense, like guys that have absolutely no business being on the football field. Those targets are now going to go to Davante Adams, and they have 175 vacated targets overall. So yes, I think all of them probably see a little regression in terms of target volume, but it's kind of an all or this tide lifts all boat situation where Adams coming in should help the offense be more efficient overall. So again, I prefer Chase, but it is the slightest of preferences. I think they're both awesome receivers. Our wide receiver 5 is Buffalo Bills receiver Stefon Diggs. I actually have him a place ahead of Adams, and I can see the argument for putting Adams ahead of him. Adams is just far more efficient. He was third in yards per route run. Stefon Diggs, through his career, has been pretty solid, but last year he took a pretty sharp drop. He went down to 1.84 yards per route run. That was 26th in the NFL, looking at all players that had at least 100 targets at the receiver or tight end position. For reference, he was at 2.5 in both 2020 and 2021, 2019 and 2020. So, I mean, that efficiency can't just be discounted. Ultimately, I think he makes up for that with raw volume. 5th in targets last year, 26.5% target share. The situation's not too different. They have like situational role players in Jamison Crowder and Gabe Davis expected to step up. That's pretty similar to like last year's Emmanuel Sanders and Cole Beasley. So I do think Stefon Diggs is still going to be easily the most targeted player in this offense, the second most pass heavy offense in the NFL in neutral game scripts, and the 6th fastest. So to me, there's just a ton of volume here. And I know I particularly like to bet on volume. You might bet on efficiency a little more than me. So that's what gives Stefon Diggs a slight edge over Adams. But again, we're really splitting hairs.
Yeah, Stefon Diggs is obviously great, right? There's a lot of great things you could say about him. Last year, like while you said he did kind of take a slight step down, he was still top 5 in targets, top 10 receptions, top 10 in receiving yards, as well as touchdowns. Stefon Diggs, like you said, is linked to one of the best offenses in the NFL with a guy who's willing to throw the ball deep down the field to Stefon Diggs. I think that this year, the Buffalo Bills offense, while they've lost a couple of players, they're probably going to be the exact same, if not slightly better. Stefon Diggs is one of the better wide receivers in the NFL as well, in my opinion. And I think ranking him anywhere outside of, I would say, the top 6 is pretty crazy for him. He did finish as wide receiver 7 last year, wide receiver 9 in points per game, tied with Deontay Johnson and Chris Godwin. But again, I really think he's going to be perfectly fine. A top 5, top 6 wide receiver with Josh Allen. You just want to be betting on offenses like this when you have the clear number 1 wide receiver on the team.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have too much else to add. The volume's going to be there. The efficiency's been there in the past, and hopefully he can just take that step back to his 2019, 2020 seasons. I personally think there's a tier break after wide receiver 5. Before we move on, I just wanted to ask you that question. Do you view there being a tier break following this player?
Yes, I do, because I think the top 5, like I said earlier on in the video, this is kind of the top 5 for everyone. Now, again, you can mix and match names. You can take Davante Adams, throw him at 5. You can take Ja'Marr Chase, move him down. It doesn't matter, right? But these are the clear top 5. After this is where things seem to very much open up for most analysts, and I do believe that there is a clear tier break after this. I definitely like all these top 5 guys significantly more than I do with the players underneath.
I agree with you. And let's check out the rest of the top 12 rankings. At number 6, we have Deebo Samuel in the consensus. And there's more concerns with Deebo than the top 5. It's just flat out true. There have been the trade
Yeah.
rumors, and he hasn't rescinded his request for a trade yet, but he's been participating. I don't really see any situation where he moves to a different team. So Deebo Samuel, I think from there, the question is, what is his usage like? Is he using that running back role we saw last year, or is he more of a traditional receiver? Because there is more value to the receiver just with raw target volume he'll get. And to me personally, I think he'll likely be moved back to receiver. He'll still see some carries here and there. But you look at the running back room last year. I mean, they just had so many injuries. Mostert, Elijah Mitchell hurt at times. They're on players like JaMychal Hasty. So to me, I personally would probably make the same decision rather than slam JaMychal Hasty into the back of the offensive line. Let's actually get a playmaker who can use the ball in his hands in Deebo Samuel. And previously, when they've actually had healthy running backs, that's not something they've done a lot. So I think Deebo probably goes back to his normal receiver role. Because of that, the targets likely spike. He only had 121 last year. I view that as his floor because of the position change. And you look at efficiency, I mean, whether he touched the ball on the ground or in the air, second in yards per route run, this guy is forcing so many missed tackles and creating after the catch. He's just an electrifying playmaker. And regardless of who plays QB, I see Shanahan prioritizing getting the ball to Deebo. So to me, he's still a very, very solid bet in the top 6 here. What do you think of Deebo?
Yeah, I like Deebo Samuel a ton as well. I got him as my wide receiver 6. The only worry has to be with Trey Lance being the quarterback is Trey Lance actually a good quarterback, right? We've talked about why he's good for fantasy, and that's because he can run the ball, right? That's all I care about. I don't give a shit how good he is at passing. But when we're talking about Deebo Samuel, you have to care about how good Trey Lance is going to be. Now, if Jimmy Garoppolo is still there, I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo is going to play at all. So I'm pretty sure right now it's like a 99% chance Trey Lance is going to be the guy all year long unless he gets hurt. I think Debo is going to be just fine with him, but that does worry me. And seeing him have a dip in rushing attempts could definitely hurt him because he did score a decent amount of rushing touchdowns last season. 14 total touchdowns for Debo last year, number 2 wide receiver. He was the number 2 receiver in fantasy football and in points per game. He's going to be just fine, but I'm just not that excited about Deebo Samuel in the same way I am with Stefon Diggs, Adams, Chase, Jefferson, and Kupp.
I agree with you. I think the Lance thing is the biggest concern. I personally did not think he was very good coming out of
Yeah.
North Dakota State, but we'll see if he can develop. He played pretty poorly in his only starts in the NFL last year, propped up solely based on his rushing. So that is a major concern. Wide receiver 7 for us is CeeDee Lamb. This is a player that I'm a little higher on than you, and it has everything to do with volume. They're losing Amari Cooper. Michael Gallup is injured. We're not really sure when he's going to come back at this point, but don't be surprised if he starts the year on PUP. He had a late ACL tear, and he waited even longer to have surgery. Because of that, especially Amari Cooper, this offense is vacating 205 targets, and 181 of them are coming from the wide receiver position. Last year, CeeDee Lamb had 118 targets, kind of in a situational role. He's right around that like 70% snap share, 70% route share. I think that jumps towards the 90, 95% we see the alphas play across the NFL. And then you look at yards per route run. He's been on a continual ascent from his career. Started at 1.81. Last year, he was at 1.94. That was 21st in the NFL. And we're hoping he can crest that 2.0 yards per route run mark this year. That is the elite territory where we see the best receivers in the NFL. From there, I don't think the offense is going to change too much. They're still really fast, second in plays per game, 6th in pass rate and neutral game scripts. So the volume should be there for CD. It just comes down to, can he take that step forward and actually enter the elite territory in terms of talent that the Davante Adams and these other receivers, they've already entered. What do you think about CeeDee Lamb this year?
Yeah, I have CeeDee Lamb ranked slightly lower, but again, it's nothing against CeeDee Lamb. I think he's a great player, and I've thought that ever since he was drafted to the Dallas Cowboys that he was going to be put in position to potentially eventually eclipse Amari Cooper and be the number 1 guy. Obviously, now Amari Cooper is gone. Michael Gallup, like you said, he could miss 5-6 games. Who really knows? Maybe he'll be back week 1. We really don't know right now. It is June, but my best guess, if I was to have to guess, is Michael Gallup going to miss 3, 4, 5 games potentially? My guess would be yes. CeeDee Lamb will instantly be the number 1 wide receiver. He'll be the number 1 guy, even if Gallup is there. The biggest reason why I think CeeDee Lamb struggled a bit last season was because of the quarterback play. Dak Prescott was very inconsistent. I talked about this in the quarterbacks video. There's games where he plays up against Tampa week 1 where this guy looks like he might be the best quarterback in the NFL. And then he has down games where he looks like he has no fucking idea what football even is. Like he has no idea how to see which receiver to throw the ball to, and he plays terribly. So if we see him healthy, I think the reason why he was playing so bad was because he wasn't healthy. Him 100% healthy this season, there's no reason why CeeDee Lamb can't be a top 5 wide receiver, especially in an offense like the Dallas Cowboys. My biggest worry about CeeDee Lamb is Dak Prescott. Will he be able to stay consistent? I believe he will, and thus I think CeeDee Lamb could be a top 5 wide receiver. I don't have him ranked there, but I think it is possible.
Yeah, I have him one position ahead of Deebo just because the volume is going to be better. And I think that means a lot for fantasy. But efficiency, still a question mark. Dak did strain that calf it within the first 5 weeks of the season last year. So hopefully injuries don't plague him again. And the offense can continue to hum. Wide receiver 8 is Mike Evans. And honestly, I've been considering moving Mike Evans up. And here's why. The guy has been just the staple of consistency in the NFL at the receiver position since he entered the league. No, he doesn't typically enter the top 5 in terms of, targets, yards per route, run, some of these metrics, but he's a surefire bet to get you 1,000 yards, maybe score 10 touchdowns. He's right around there every year in his career, and he plays on an explosive offense. With the Buccaneers last year, they were 3rd in plays per game, 1st in neutral game script pass rate. With Tom Brady coming back, I don't really see that changing. And now you might be pulling Chris Godwin out of the picture for a while. Chris Godwin, there have been bad reports this week. It looks like he's going to start on PUP. Now, that only means he's guaranteed to miss 4 games, but he also doesn't have to come off right away at 4 games. Could Chris Godwin maybe miss 6 to 8 games? Yeah, it's in the range of outcomes. And if you're telling me Mike Evans is going to be the alpha target in this Tom Brady-led offense for 6 to 8 weeks, I might bump him up to wide receiver 6. I'm not going to lie to you. I think there's a lot of upside with Evans. What do you make of this situation?
Yeah, I have Evans right now as my wide receiver number 7. I think even if Chris Godwin comes back in 4 or 5 weeks, Mike Evans is still going to dominate. They no longer have Gronk. I still think Gronk's going to come back. I'll continue to hammer on this point. I think Gronk's going to come back, but if Gronk isn't there, it's just going to be Mike Evans, Russell Gage, and Cameron Brate for the first couple of weeks. Mike Evans, like you said, he's not this guy that's going to see 10 plus targets a game. I would be shocked if that was the case for the whole season sample size. Maybe at the beginning of the season he is, but on the whole season, I'd be shocked if he was at 10 targets per game. But what this man does every single week is score a fucking touchdown. He scored 14 total touchdowns last year, number 2 wide receiver. Their wide receivers touchdowns and running back touchdowns is something that is very hard to predict. But when you have a guy like Mike Evans who just scores so many touchdowns, it's easy to predict. For the last couple of years, I've been off Mike Evans because I've said that, hey, the touchdowns aren't predictable. You can't just predict him to score all these touchdowns. Then every year he basically backhands me in the face and says, no, Nick, that is very possible. I do this every single year. So I'm riding the Mike Evans train. Tampa Bay Tom Brady might be old as fuck, but he's still good. He's not going to fall off. I don't believe so. I'm all in on Mike Evans, and Mike Evans is a guy that I've also considered moving up and moving him past Deebo to be my wide receiver number 6.
If we're going to be bullish on him, I think we might have to move him up. You look at Underdog Fantasy, he is climbing, and I think this corresponds directly with the Chris Godwin news. He's now up to 16.6 in terms of ADP. He's the wide receiver 7. He just passed Deebo Samuel. So we're going to have to get a little more aggressive with Evans if we're going to want to get him in some drafts. And I think this is all warranted based on the news we got. And speaking of Underdog Fantasy, we've been referencing them a lot this video. They are the best place to play fantasy football in the summer months. They just unveiled Best Ball Mania 3, which is a tournament that has $10 million in total prizes. All you have to do is draft your team. That's it. There's no waivers, no trades, no in-season management. Underdog gives you your best score every single week of the year. And then at the end of the year, the highest score wins. Last year's Best Ball Mania championship team was drafted in June, so there is no time to wait. Better yet, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100 when you use the promo code AWESOMO. That's good for 4 entries into the Best Ball Mania 3. All you have to do is head to UnderdogFantasy.com, check them out in the App Store, or even just click the link in the video description below, then use that promo code AWESOMO for $100 free. All right, wide receiver number 9, Tyreek Hill. I understand the concerns with Tyreek Hill. He's changing situations. He's moving from Patrick Mahomes to Tua Tagovailoa. Okay, that's certainly a downgrade. He's also moving to potentially a more crowded situation. I mean, the guy played alongside Kelsey, so I'm not even sure I buy this argument, but he's moving to an offense that has Jefferson, it has Jalen Waddle. I think personally the competition was worse in Kansas City when you had just a pure alpha and Kelsey alongside him. So to me, wide receiver 9 is a good value for Tyreek Hill. The way he's used, a lot of his skill set comes deep down the field, but it also comes after the catch. So could they potentially get Tua these little pitch and catch opportunities where maybe Tyreek Hill's targets increase and he's not used as much through raw efficiency? I certainly think so. But you're the Dolphins expert. Talk to me about Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, I'm wearing my Dolphins sweatshirt right now. I would like lift it up, but I think it would go invisible on the green screen. So yeah, the Dolphins because it's green, like the green screen. But yeah, the Dolphins this year with Tyreek Hill, I really expect Tyreek Hill to be the clear number one guy in this team. You don't trade all those picks, just like with Davante Adams. You don't trade all those picks, give this guy this crazy fucking contract for him not to be the number one. And I understand the concerns about Tua. We haven't seen Tua be super consistent at all. He has these good games. He has these down games. If you guys remember last year against Tennessee, the Dolphins looking to make the playoffs, and Tua looks like he's never played football in his life, right? He's throwing the ball basically right to the defense on the ground. It was raining, though. The weather was bad, but at the end of the day, Tua looked terrible in that game. And then you go back to not last season, the year prior, and you have that game against the Arizona Cardinals where Tua rises up and has this excellent game. I think Tua is an all right quarterback. I hope that he can be a top 12 quarterback in the future, but I think he's kind of in that like quarterback 16 range right now, in my opinion. And I think he's going to get better with the offensive line, and that's going to help out Tyreek Hill. You also don't need Tyreek Hill to just run streaks down the field. This isn't Madden where you can just run 4 verticals, throw it to Tyreek Hill. He's going to burn the corner because he's OP in the video game. In real life, Tyreek Hill is going to be running slants. They're going to be giving him screens to get him the football, and that's going to only make sense. Mike McDaniel is no idiot head coach. He's an offensive-minded head coach. He's going to get the ball to Tyreek Hill. People were early on comparing Tyreek Hill to Deebo Samuel. He's going to be in this Deebo Samuel role. Well, Tyreek Hill is much different than Deebo Samuel. I still think that they're going to maybe hand the ball to Tyreek Hill a couple of times because inevitably the running backs will get hurt. That's what always happens. So Tyreek Hill is going to be just fine, though, and I expect him to see a pretty similar target share to what he saw in Kansas City. He had 9.4 targets per game in Kansas City last year. I think that can be similar in Miami, even if they're looking to be a little bit more run heavy.
For sure. I mean, even with Waddle coming back, with Jefferson coming back, this team lost 183 targets. So, I mean, there's plenty of targets available for Tyreek Hill entering the offense, and he should be a priority based on what they gave up for him. Wide receiver 10 for us is A.J. Brown. Again, there's concerns, but it basically comes down to the offensive structure. He'll be moving to an offense that has Jalen Hurts. They're going to be run heavy. Last year, the Eagles were 31st in passer to neutral game scripts. You know who is right there with them? Tennessee.
Titans.
Tennessee, yes. So he is going to, not quite a carbon copy, but a very similar offense in terms of structure. They're going to be run heavy. They're going to use their dual threat signal caller, Jalen Hurts, who struggled with efficiency at times in his career. But one thing that there isn't a concern with here is A.J. Brown's personal efficiency. Even with Tannehill in that offense, he was still 4th in yards per route run in the NFL. This is one of the most efficient young playmakers at the position, and we've already seen him live through efficiency for multiple seasons. With Jalen Hurts in the offense, I think this is kind of a lateral step, not a step back, which some people are projecting. To me, I think it is very much a similar situation. So I'm comfortable with A.J. Brown in the top 10. If you look at Underdog right now, he's just outside the top 10, wide receiver 11, but ultimately still an ADP of 25.4. I'm pretty close to that in terms of where he is in my rankings. Where's A.J. Brown for you?
Yeah, I got A.J. Brown at wide receiver 11. And something that's very funny that we don't even talk about now, but used to be the case a couple of years ago, is these wide receivers getting traded from one team to another, and then everyone just believing that they're going to have a down year. If you remember a couple of years ago, people said that about Stefon Diggs, about DeAndre Hopkins, but now no one talks about this at all. We have Davante Adams, wide receiver 4, Hill, wide receiver 9, Brown, wide receiver 10. They all got traded in the offseason, and no one talks about that being a negative thing because it's not. I understand that it's not, but it's just funny that a couple of years ago, everyone really brought that up that like the first year on a team, they're going to struggle. A.J. Brown's going to be just fine. Again, that he's on a run heavy team. He's been on a run heavy team. He's just super efficient. And I just don't see, again, why these teams are trading all these picks for these guys not to use him. He's the clear number one guy for the Philadelphia Eagles. And again, they don't need to be the most pass heavy team for A.J. Brown to be very efficient. If anything, this is going to potentially really hurt Devontae Smith.
Yeah, I agree with you. Dallas Goedert, maybe. They don't have any vacated targets. So when you look at the
Okay.
team as a whole, I mean, the targets have to come from somewhere. And, maybe they just come from Jalen Rager and Quez Watkins and these ancillary players who really don't offer much to the team. That's very much a possibility, too, here. Moving to wide receiver 11, we have Keenan Allen, old man Keenan Allen, I'm going to call him. He's 30 years old, but he's just 1 year older than Cooper Kupp. Again, there's kind of this little bit of disconnect. Players that have been in the league for a long time sometimes get the negative stigma in terms of their age, when players that are still old but haven't been in the league as long kind of avoid it. With Keenan Allen, his efficiency hasn't really dropped that much. You look at him as a player, he was still 30th in yards per route run. And I mean, he's never going to be like one of the leaders in yards per route run, just the way he's
Yeah.
used. He wins more with volume than he does like downfield ability. He was still seventh in targets, 25% target share, and one of the most efficient offenses in the NFL. They were fifth in plays per game, fourth in passer to neutral game scripts. With Herbert, that's not really going to change. And what I like most about Allen, the team kind of indirectly bet on him again this year. They didn't really add any pass catchers outside of the tight end position. So, I mean, like he's still going to be competing with just Mike Williams, Jalen Guyton, Josh Palmer. I don't really see a way he doesn't finish as the wide receiver one in this offense with a target share at least close to 25% from last year. So for me, very safe option at the back end of the top 12. Do you agree with me on Keenan Allen here?
Yeah, I got him ranked one spot higher at wide receiver 10. I think he's super safe as well. One of the best route runners in the NFL. Again, another guy that is linked to one of these great teams in the NFL. The Chargers, as a team, didn't necessarily put it together and make that playoff push that people wanted. They were very close, though, in that final game up against the Raiders. They should have just tied. I still stand by with that. They should have just tied and both went to the playoffs. But at the end of the day, Keenan Allen is one of the better receivers in the NFL. Again, linked to Justin Herbert, linked to this great offense. Austin Eckler does siphon away a decent amount of value from Keenan Allen because it just seems like Justin Herbert dumps the ball off so much that does kind of hurt Keenan Allen. But again, he's the clear number one. Mike Williams has shown these flashes, right, of greatness out of Mike Williams, but he's never really been consistent. He doesn't have like 5 great games in a row. Have like 2 good games and then 3 games where it seems like, wow, why did I even start this guy? And then he starts playing well again. So Keenan Allen is the clear number one guy in this team, and he is the safest player outside of Austin Eckler in this receiving core.
I agree with you. Not much to add there. So we can get to a little discussion at number 12 because we had a little bit of a debate here. I have
Yeah.
T. Higgins at wide receiver 11. He's not in your top 12. You actually had Deontay Johnson for Pittsburgh as your wide receiver 12. For me, man, let's see here. He's way down for me. He's wide receiver 24 on my rankings. But overall, when we cross reference this with Underdog's ADP, right now, T. Higgins is wide receiver 10 in terms of ADP, 23.5 overall. Deontay Johnson's wide receiver 19 with an ADP of 40.9. So I understand the ranking for Deontay Johnson, but kind of just like a ranking philosophy for me. I never want guys like significantly above ADP because, like if I can get Deontay Johnson in the third round, I don't want to take him in the second. I want to preserve that ADP
Definitely.
value. So he's a little lower for me, but we can talk about both these players because I know you are very bullish on Johnson. For me with Higgins, it's very similar to Jamar Chase. He's just in an explosive offense. He actually out-targeted Jamar Chase on a per game basis. And Higgins was also extremely efficient in this offense. The concerns are real. It's just going to be a very crowded offense at times. And I think these guys could trade big games to some degree. But I think ultimately at the end of the year, you'll want Higgins. With Johnson, I understand the bullish case. He doesn't really have those concerns. Like he should be the most targeted player in that offense, really without a doubt. I mean, they have Chase Claypool, they draft George Pickens. They also undergo the quarterback change, but I think you could personally argue that that might be a positive for Johnson. So let's talk about Higgins and Johnson in conjunction with each other. What do you think about these two players?
Yeah, and again, just because I don't have Higgins in the top 12 doesn't mean I think Higgins is like some garbage can, right? He's still a top 15 receiver for me. I think Higgins' ADP is a little high on underdog because people are going for the stack. They want Burrow, they want Chase, they want Higgins. I think that in a normal redraft league on ESPN NFL, I think T. Higgins is probably going to go wide receiver 14, 15. And I think his ADP is really only so high on underdog because of the stacking factor. I think that T. Higgins could be a top 12 wide receiver, certainly. I just think where he's coming off the board is a little too high for my liking. Deontay Johnson, like you said, he's the clear number one receiver on the Pittsburgh Steelers. I understand that they're going from Big Ben to either Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett right now is practicing with the third string when they had the practices. So that's not great. So it seems to me that Mr. Mitchell Trubisky will be the starting quarterback for at least the first couple of games of the season. Either way, They are both upgrades from Big Ben. The question, though, is does Kenny Pickett, does Mitchell Trubisky trust Deontay Johnson like Big Ben does? Because Big Ben was just throwing the ball blindly to Deontay Johnson. He's just peppering Deontay Johnson left and right. He didn't give a fuck if Deontay Johnson was dropping the ball. He's just going to feed him the ball. I don't know if Trubisky or Pickett will do the same. With that said, though, the upside for Deontay Johnson is just so high, being the number one receiver in Pittsburgh. That's why I got him ranked ahead of T. Higgins. Again, T. Higgins is a great player. You could even say that he might be better than Jamar Chase, but I think in terms of fantasy football, I want the guy that's going to be seeing a lot of targets, and I think is pretty efficient as well when he does get the targets. And I think actually he hasn't been that efficient, but I think he will be more efficient in the future. You got it? Oh, you're muted, Matt.
Sorry about that. Deontay Johnson's kind of in the same areas like Keenan Allen in terms of yards per route run. And I think that makes sense because they're both kind of used in the slot, used especially with Big Ben, very much underneath. Deontay Johnson actually a little better in terms of yards per route run than Keenan Allen, which was a bit surprising to me, but it was the truth. But overall, that is the top 12 wide receivers. You see it on the screen. We'll have future videos for you guys where we talk about Michael Pittman, DJ Moore, Jalen Waddle, Mike Williams. So make sure to check out the channel and the corresponding videos with this. Nick and I already did running backs. We already did quarterbacks. Any last words for the people, Nick?
Yeah, let us know in the comment section where we went wrong, right? Because everyone has drastically different opinions. So let us know, like, hey, this guy should be in the top 12 that's not in our top 12. Because there are a couple of players that I can realistically see finishing inside the top 12 that we have not talked about today. And make sure while you're down there in the comment section, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you are new, and make sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. We talked about him throughout the video. I draft on there basically every single day. So if you see me in the lobby, tweet at me. I think that'd be pretty interesting. Again, promo code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, for that $100 first match deposit bonus.
There you have it. He is Nick Lepri on Twitter at Notorious Fantasy. I am Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you again next time.